Okay, what is clustering? So in the simplest sense, clustering is an effort, is a method to lump up the observations into a few groups. And these groups are called clusters. And not every group is acceptable. So like every other method that we are going to learn, there is a measure of success of the method. And this measure is called also goodness of fit. So we want to lump up the observations into a fewer groups and have a satisfactory measure of success. Okay, let's go through the materials that are written more meticulously. Good. So clustering is a broad class of methods for discovering unknown subgroups in data. Here, data means observations. So we don't know these clusters. We don't know how many there are there, and we don't know their characteristics and features. And clustering, ideally, will find them for us. Any clustering method tries to lump up observations, the number of observations, let's say it is n, into a fewer clusters, and the number of clusters is k, in a way that n is way bigger than k. So for instance, we want to put 10,000 observations into 3 clusters. The items of each cluster are very similar. So there are criteria to meet here. These clusters, whether they are 3, 4, how many of them, we don't know right now. They must meet this criterion that each cluster, the items that are in that cluster are very similar. So if you recall our previous example, the mangoes of each cluster are very similar. And the items of 2 different clusters are very dissimilar. Let's come back to our example. So we can see that this is a good clustering because the items in each cluster, they are very similar, while every 2 items of 2 different clusters, they are very dissimilar. This is the ideal way that we want our cluster to be. So we are relying on clustering methods to find such clusters for us. And these 2 conditions must be met as far as it is possible. To put it simply, clustering is for finding the clusters of items such that clusters are homogeneous. So there are two terms that I'm going to repeat a lot. One of them is this homogeneous, and it means that the items inside of clusters are similar. So there are all triangles in this cluster, they are all squares in this one, they are all stars in this clusters. And another term that I'm going to repeat is homogeneity. And when I'm talking about homogeneity, I'm talking about the whole story. Okay? That how good is this clustering done? So let's focus on what we have here. To put it simply, clustering is for finding clusters of items such that clusters are homogeneous. to find similar items and group them up. So we want to find the similar item, the first, and group them up, put them in distinct groups. I think it's now very clear. But let's see it in a fabricated toy example. Let's clarify it using an example. This is a data set of 566 students in a scatter plot visualized using two features: hours of study and the performance in a specific module. Let's say that these are previous students of this module. And the number of points here is 566. I wish I could devise a study plan for every single student. It would be 566 plans, or giving them individual feedbacks about their performance and hours of study, or based on these two variables. But it's not easy, okay? It might be possible, it's not easy, and you might think that it's not necessary to give individual feedbacks. If I can find similar students based on these two variables, I can devise a fewer plans or write a fewer feedbacks. So similar students would get similar feedbacks, right? So clustering is a way to find those similar students. Here, clustering has succeeded to find 4 clusters. I have told our k-means clustering or any other algorithm that there are 4 clusters, and our algorithm has found them. Okay? So this is one cluster, C1. This is the second cluster, C2. This is the third cluster, C3. And this is fourth, C4. So we can see that C1 is composed of students with lower hours of study and higher marks. So low effort, high mark. Maybe these are students that they have had some feedback, they have had similar modules before this module that we are looking at at its result. C2 are high effort, high performance or mark. These are very good students. They have invested hours in this module and they got the reward at the end with a high performance. What about the C3? C3 is more or less students of low to medium effort and low performance. So these are students that they have not invested enough time on the module, less than 3 hours, less than 10 hours, let's say, and they got lower than 50 on the mark. What about C4? C4 are the students of high effort and low performance. So now, instead of going through 566 students and trying to understand the structure of my students in the module, I used clustering to find 4 clusters of students, 4 types of students. And the hidden structure is now revealed. And sometimes it is not possible to see this hidden structure by going through every single of observations. Sometimes it is not possible to understand a jungle by studying every single tree. You have to fly a drone and or you have to fly yourself and have a look from heights. Okay? Sometimes less detail is helping us to understand and to find the hidden structure. Good. If I can find meaningful groups of similar students based on their features, then I can approach a few groups rather than individuals. So now I can approach C1 and tell them that congratulations for the high mark. It's very interesting that you have invested fewer hours than others and got so high marks. And I might want to interview a few of them to know that what is their secret. I can then send a feedback to high effort, high performance students and congratulate them for the performance, and also appreciate them for the efforts that they have put in this module. What about the C3? I can approach them telling them the first thing is you have not invested enough hours in this module. And if you invest enough hours, you will jump to this part of the plot. Or I might need to talk to a few of them to see exactly what's the problem. So this C4, the fourth cluster, is the most interesting one. I cannot tell them to invest more time because they have invested close to expected amount of time that they had to invest. And still they didn't get any decent mark. So maybe if I talk to them, I figure out that they don't study in a proper way. Maybe I figure out that they have some problems at the time of taking the exam. Maybe they had flu or COVID or some sort of illness. Maybe I figured out that they have this attention problem while studying or something like this. But in any case, the moral of the story is, instead of going through all the profiles, I used clustering to find a few clusters, meaningful clusters. And these clusters are seemingly good ones, okay? We will define a proper way to evaluate the goodness of clustering. And why I'm telling that these are good clusters, because because those two criteria are met, and those two are one. The within cluster similarity is high. 2, between cluster similarity is low. So every two members of a cluster, they are similar, and two members of two different clusters, they are unsimilar, they are dissimilar, they are very far from each other. So it means that they are dissimilar. And let's think about these two. I mean, this guy or girl around 100 on the final mark and around 6 hours of study. This one around 13 hours of study and around 20 in the mark. And we can see that their profiles of variables are very, very different. But what about these two here? We have another close to 100 mark and around to 5 hours. And you can see that these two profiles, this one and this one, are quite similar comparing to the ones that are coming from two different clusters. So this clustering seems to me a successful effort. Let's go and talk about the reason behind clustering.